Week 13 focused on what policy options can help lead us to a sustainable energy future. In your course material and discussions, you explored the answers to these questions related to citizen action for a sustainable energy future. What current policies exist in the United States and other countries? What other policies could be put into effect to encourage a more sustainable energy future? How do these policies work? What are the advantages and disadvantages to current and potential energy policies? What policies could maximize oil and greenhouse gas emissions reductions? To help answer the first question, you explored the database of state incentives for renewables and efficiency, DESIRE, to learn what policies are already in place in the United States and how they vary from state to state. You also read the EPA document Clearing the Air, which explains about the current policy for capping and trading emissions of SOx and NOx, which is the basis for much debate in the U.S. about whether we should use a similar policy for greenhouse gas emissions. And you read the article What Would Jefferson Do?, which examines historic and current U.S. subsidies for fossil fuels, nuclear, and renewables. Before going into more depth about these readings, however, I would like to highlight the fact that there are several federal, state, and regional institutions in charge of overseeing the various energy policies that are currently in place in the United States and have been proposed for the future. These institutions range from the many offices of the United States Department of Energy to FERC, NERC, the U.S. Department of Transportation, Interior Department, Environmental Protection Agency, 50 state governments, the District of Columbia, the White House Council on Environmental Quality, and the Office of Science and Technology Policy, to name a few. As you can imagine, having so many cooks in the kitchen can be a big challenge when it comes to formulating effective energy policy. The International Energy Agency's summary report on U.S. energy policies makes this statement about the challenges associated with such a disjointed system. A fundamental problem with the U.S. energy policy is the absence of a clear link at the federal policy level between energy, environmental, and security policies. While individual policies and measures address aspects of each of these three fundamental requirements, they are not consistent. And the United States energy policy as a whole is not doing well at balancing the three E's of economic development, energy supply security, and environmental protection. This lack of a balanced policy is contributing to the continued high and growing dependence on fossil fuels, a situation that is almost unique among IEA member countries, which in turn contributes to increasing import dependence and worsening the environmental impacts of energy use. That report goes on to say that concerns about the lack of coherence in policy development between the federal and the state levels relate in particular to a very strong but inconsistent policy push, and policies which appear disjointed in terms of pace, consistency, continuity, and approach. Developing a piecemeal state-by-state approach to environmental and renewable policy has serious negative consequences on costs and effectiveness of implementing it. Currently, there is no federal policy to assign a value of CO2 emissions, which would internalize the cost of emitting CO2 into the price of fossil fuels. Nor is there a plan by the United States administration to create mechanisms that would enable individual states to create such a system with a regional or cross-state coverage, such as a federal registry of CO2 emissions. The Office of Management and Budget is responsible for overseeing all rulemaking by any federal agency, which allows for some cohesion between all of these various institutions, but they are still very disjointed. The OMB's primary method of determining whether a rule or policy goes forward is through benefit-cost analysis and cost-effectiveness analysis. So even if other sustainability indicators are the priority, at the end of the day, any proposed energy policy has to make economic sense in order to be implemented as federal law. As you explored the DESIRE database, you were no doubt slightly overwhelmed by the sheer number of energy policies that currently exist. But what do you expect with so many institutions having a role in creating these policies? Here are some of the major federal policies that currently have significant impacts on U.S. energy decisions. The Federal Investment Tax Credit and the Federal Production Tax Credit are the two biggies for renewables. The ITC is a 30% tax credit for the capital expenditures, CapEx, for wind, geothermal, biomass, hydroelectric, and landfill gas resources. This means if you are putting in a renewable energy system, you can claim a deduction of 30% of the cost of that system on your tax form. The PTC provides a tax credit of 2.2 cents per kilowatt hour for the same resources. You have to choose to either take the ITC or the PTC. You can't take both. Unfortunately, these big federal policies have a history of short timelines where they will be approved by Congress for a limited time period, and then there is a lot of anxiety in the renewable industries as the deadline for the incentives to expire approaches, with everyone scrambling to get projects up and running in time. It doesn't make for a very stable industry. For example, the ITC is supposed to go down to 10% in 2016, and the PTC was supposed to expire at the end of last year, but was extended. MATS and CSAPR provide guidelines on allowable criteria and hazardous pollutant emissions for power plants. The Northeast and California are currently the only areas of the country with greenhouse gas emissions legislation, as no federal greenhouse gas legislation has yet to pass successfully. Both of these policies are of the cap-and-trade variety, in which there is a cap on allowable emissions, and participants can choose to either meet that limit or purchase allowances to pollute more than that limit. The way the initial allowances are distributed has a big impact on the effectiveness of the law. Industry leaders will argue that older power plants should be grandfathered in with more allowances to start, but that kind of defeats the purpose of the law, which is trying to get these older plants to clean up. So the region tries to strike a political balance between all of the different interested parties, and the information here summarizes how California has handled that political balance. Also, nearly 30 states have enforceable renewable portfolio standards, which set a standard renewable energy and/or energy efficiency percentage to be achieved by a specified date and implements enforcement rules. This map from the Desire website shows where each renewable portfolio standard is located and the specific percentages and other criteria involved in each policy. The Desire website has a plethora of maps like this, showing where other state-based energy policies are in effect. For example, this map shows which states have implemented net metering policies, which allow people who put solar or wind on their homes or businesses to get credits or payments from utilities for the excess electricity they generate. Not all net metering policies are created equal, however, so you have to read the fine print to know if they are more geared toward protecting the home or business owner or toward protecting the utility. Interconnection policies are also important in this area because if you want to install solar or wind on your home or business, you are probably going to need to still be connected to the grid unless you are planning to go off-grid. Interconnection policies provide rules for the consumer and utility to follow to make sure the interconnection is safe and does not disrupt the grid. Like net metering policies, some interconnection policies are geared more toward protecting the utilities than the homeowner or business owner, and some are aimed more at protecting the homeowner or business owner than the utilities. There's a nice summary table on the Desire website that shows which states have which types of financial incentives for renewable energy. You can click on each colored box to learn more about each policy type for each state. Some of these policies are local in nature, created at the town or city level, like this one in Lancaster, California, where a Republican mayor, that's right, don't let anyone tell you that renewable energy is a liberal idea. It actually started with the Republicans. A Republican mayor decided that he wanted to make his town the solar capital of the universe, and he implemented a policy to require solar panels in all new construction in the town. There are also other federal pollution programs that have implications for energy. Some of them are listed here. Some people think that the government should not be so involved in making energy more sustainable. However, the article What Would Jefferson Do shows that the U.S. government has always been very involved in energy, especially with fossil fuels and nuclear when they were just starting out. In fact, the cumulative historical federal subsidies for fossil fuels and nuclear completely dwarf the subsidies for renewables and biofuels. When comparing subsidies at different stages of the energy sector's lifetime, again, fossil fuels and nuclear subsidies have completely dwarfed those of renewables. And a similar trend is seen when we look at subsidies as a percentage of the federal budget, except that here nuclear dwarfs everything. The main conclusion from this study is that when you add the numbers up, you discover that, again factoring in inflation, $1.8 billion per year was spent on subsidies during the early years of the modern oil and gas industries, compared to just $400 million annually for renewables. In short, rather than being some sort of sinkhole for federal subsidies, renewables have been getting significantly less public support than other new energy sources did upon their introduction into the United States. That is not to say that the government should increase or continue to subsidize renewables, but that at least the decision should be made in the context of a century of subsidization for now conventional energy sources. You explored these two resources which discuss several other policy options, many of which are already successful in other countries. In this video, Hal Harvey discussed the importance of 9 policies toward achieving a sustainable energy future. Energy efficient building codes, stricter efficiency standards for cars, stricter efficiency standards for appliances, getting the prices right by stopping subsidizing fossil fuels and by charging for pollution, incentivizing utilities to make money on energy services, not on selling more electricity. 12 states are already doing this. Renewable portfolio standards, which 29 states have passed, and industrial energy efficiency standards, and spending more money on renewable energy research and development. The Resources for the Future, RFF, study toward a new national energy policy, assessing the options, assesses the effectiveness of 35 energy policies and policy combinations in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and oil consumption. At the end, there is a nice, concise summary description of all of the different policies included in the analysis. Part of that summary description is shown here as Table 2, and the following slides continue to show the rest of the table. Many of these policies are applied versions of the ideas Hal Harvey discusses in the top 10, or really top 9, video. For example, RFF assesses the effectiveness of a stricter CAFE standard, known as the Pavley CAFE, and feebates and rebates for people whose cars perform worse or better, respectively, than these standards. This goes along with what Hal Harvey discusses about getting the prices right. RFF extends these pricing policies to gasoline and oil tax increases as well. RFF also considers several versions of a greenhouse gas emissions cap and trade policy and several energy efficiency policies. As well as policies that provide incentives for renewable power and renewables, including several versions of a renewable or clean energy portfolio standard. And RFF examines some cross-cutting policies that include combinations of policies mentioned previously. The main conclusions of the RFF study are that a single policy instrument will not efficiently reduce both oil use and CO2 emissions to meet the selected targets, and combinations of policies are more effective at reducing both oil use and CO2 emissions, meeting or exceeding both reduction benchmarks laid out in the study. Overall, pricing policies deliver the greatest reductions in oil use or CO2 emissions for a given cost, achieving 33% more carbon reductions than the study target, while also meeting the target oil reduction. Figures 3 and 4 in the RFF study provide a nice comparison of the advantages and disadvantages of these proposed energy policies in terms of CO2 emissions reductions and energy security from oil consumption reductions. This graph shows the modeled effectiveness of each policy in terms of reducing oil consumption. The y-axis shows oil reductions in million barrels of oil per day, and the legend shows the cost per barrel of oil reduced for each policy. The policy that would gradually increase the percentage of heavy-duty trucks that run on liquefied natural gas from 10% to 100% over 10 years results in the greatest oil reductions at the least cost. Interestingly, some of the clean energy policies actually result in more oil consumption. The cap and trade policies do very well at reducing oil consumption, but have variations in price. Some price differences can be attributed to the way offsets are handled. As described in the video you watched on Cap and Trade, offsets refer to a policy mechanism that allows companies to purchase pollution reductions from other companies, oftentimes in other countries. This allows companies for which it would have been very expensive to reduce their actual emissions to pay other companies for whom it is relatively cheaper. The idea is that there is still a global reduction in emissions even if one company reduces more than another. As the video pointed out, there can be problems with enforcement where offsets are concerned because it is difficult to determine if the offset at another company or area, especially when that area is in a different country, is a true reduction in emissions or not. The video pointed out some very real issues with offsets, but this graph shows that if we don't have them, the cost of reductions is definitely much higher, although greater reductions can be achieved without offsets as well. So there is a trade-off between cost and effectiveness at meeting emissions reductions goals, whether you use offsets or not. Figure 4 shows the effectiveness of reducing CO2 emissions on the y-axis, and the cost of the reductions is communicated by the color of the bars. LNG trucks are actually far less effective at reducing CO2 emissions compared with cap and trade policies, even though the LNG policy was quite effective at reducing oil consumption. The most effective policy for reducing greenhouse gas emissions is cap and trade, with no offsets, at a whopping 29,000 million metric tons. That is well beyond the target specified in the study. There are several other options for meeting the target at a lower cost, including cap and trade excluding transportation, cap and trade with a renewable portfolio standard, and central cap and trade. These are estimated to cost between $11 and $12 per ton. There are other less costly policies, but they are not as effective and don't meet the target. Now that you have a basic understanding of the various policies that could be used to help achieve a sustainable energy future, we will conclude the course next week, in week 14, with information about what you as an individual can do to take action toward a more sustainable energy future, including supporting the policies that are most effective at achieving the sustainable energy goals you would like to see achieved.